You need to unmute yourself. So, sit back. We'll sit up. Start off with so we can do the tapping exercise. Just rubbing your hands together. And starting with the pads of your fingers on your face. Light, rapid movement going up over your head and neck. And then down to one shoulder and your arm. And on the other side. Upper part of your chest. And belly. And your legs. Feet out. Feel your weight dropping back into the chair. Just to remind yourself of that feeling, letting go as you sink into the chair. And a sort of what I would describe as a draining away feeling, a sense of your body just sort of almost like ice melting, I suppose, or something like that. You breathe in, just becoming quite smooth, with the rise and fall of your breath in your belly. Nice calm feeling in your mind. It develops out of this growing awareness and focusing on various aspects of your body. Bring your feet in and to the upright position with your weight just a little bit forwards. Take a few moments really to go through the same process again. Your hips sinking down, because chances are as you came up, you probably stiffened up somewhere. And as you breathe in again, the rhythm that your breathing settles into, and the quality of your breath as you begin to soften. If you can just observe that, it's quite tricky because as soon as you think about your breathing, you sort of consciously take it over. But that sort of very smooth, natural rhythm that develops can be a sort of clue for the feeling and the quality of movement, the rhythm of the movement when we do the exercises. They're not necessarily sort of linked in with each other as we know, but this sort of background quality can offer something to the movement. The hips sinking down, your head just sitting on your shoulders and your chin pulled back, giving you just this slight glimmer of a feeling of a lift through your back, as though somebody's just very gently taken hold of your head and pulled up a little bit without sort of, you're not hanging from your head or anything, just the spaces between the vertebrae opening up a little bit. And that feeling in your spine really becomes part of this imagined column going up through your body that holds you upright. So I describe it as a stronger feeling, a denser feeling, but never stiff, and denser but not packed, shall we say. Still that space there. And in fact, it's not restricted to a column. It's just this feeling of the body becoming denser as you move inwards in much the same way, really, as if you get a ball, put it on water, and you push down. It feels like the water becomes denser, the pressure of the water becomes denser. So the outer edge of your body are very soft, and as you go inwards, the softness is retained, but there's more resistance as well. Like as I've said before, perhaps you're pushing your fingers into either side of a balloon. Now turning your head. So that quality, and the phrase often used in Tai Chi is that outness, there's the softness of cotton, and inwards there's the temper of steel, means that the part of your body that's contacting the air, or if you're using this image of moving through water, contacting the water, actually it almost dissolves in to the medium that it's moving through. And then the shoulders, and going forwards. And hands to your sides. So your weight's just settled at this point. A little bit later, we do this with the weight movement, but this is really a continuation of the last exercise. Still that rotation in your shoulders, and the sort of underlying movements in your chest and ribs, upper back. So these initial movements give us a chance to just identify individual parts of the body, almost like just sort of like sorting out the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle before you put the picture together. Same with this one, another movement that we do with different movements, different exercises. Rest your hands. So now we bring our attention down to the center of the body, easing forwards, and this is where we start to put the picture together, really, because it's when we move in the center that we get that sense of the movement radiating out to all parts of the body. So you roll your center forwards, tilt the pelvis forwards, however you think of it. More of your weight goes into your feet. Go back, more goes into your hips. When you do that, there's a movement, it moves your shoulders, it moves your spine, and so on and so forth. So we begin to hardwire an awareness of the center part of your body, and also by extension we begin to literally hardwire the the the, 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 the processes that connect from the center to the rest of the body. Turn a little. So some of that will happen in our nervous system. The science of neurology has a phrase apparently where they say that neurons, the nerve cells that fire together, wire together. Turn the other way. In other words, if you fire a particular set of nerve cells, which you would do making a particular sort of action or even applying a particular thought, that kind of thing, then the more that happens, the more they wire together. They don't exactly fuse together, but the more smoothly that pattern works for you. And then going around in the circle. As you get more familiar with these movements, then that process of observing the movement becomes more important. Rather than thinking, right, I need to do this to make this happen, you understand the movement, you have an intent for the movement to happen. And so you actually bring your attention to bear on what is happening within the body. You observe and investigate. And then back the other way. So what is happening happens at a level where mind and body very much overlap. But by bringing your conscious attention to that, you sort of shine a spotlight on it. And maybe even aid this wiring process of the nervous system. So these movements are worth regularly repeating. They're very simple, but there are some very important things going on within them, particularly the ones that move from the center. Now settle back into your hips, raise one knee and push out. You're pushing your foot out. Imagine again as though there was a bit of resistance to the movement. You're pushing through water, or maybe just using your foot to, I don't know, maybe there's a table in front of you or a box in front of you. You're pushing that away, planting the foot. And then on the other side, hands down to your sides, arms out to your sides. So now combining two of those movements, the rocking of the weight forwards and backwards and the winding of your arms. So if you manage to, shall we say, hardwire, fire together, wire together certain neural patterns, then now you're bringing those two sets of movements together into one movement. and then fishermen cast a net, and then rolling the ball in. And pigeon spreads its wings. Another thing that I think becomes, in one way or another, hardwired in us is this overall sense of connection between mind and body. The responsiveness of our body to changes in the mind, essentially instructions in the mind, increases. That can be very useful, but it can also be a little bit tricky at times. I do find sometimes, if I'm teaching a class, I need to be careful that I think, oh, maybe I'll do that one later. Or, yeah, when I've done this, what I'll do is I'll go to that. And if I'm not on the ball, I can sometimes find myself starting to do the exercise I'm planning to do in 20 minutes simply because it appears that I've given the instruction to my body. So, uh, apart from that, it's actually a very useful thing. And then pushing away. It's quite natural, that response. It's, you can think back as far as Pavlov's dogs and, just basically creating a response by ringing a bell. Our bodies naturally respond to stimuli from outside and from inside. Next time you pass an advertising board or see an advert on television, recognize that actually that's what advertising is doing. It's trying to provoke physical responses in you. It shows you a picture of a chocolate bar and you think, oh yeah, I could do with a bit of chocolate. and then punch with both fists. This is that winding movement that we did earlier, except you're not going round in the full circle, you're just doing a half circle. And then wind it out. Remember the softness of cotton. So in the same way that if you're wearing a cotton garment, it seems to just was mold itself to the skin. So as you imagine going through the water, your hands, your fingers, for instance, aren't straining against the resistance. Remember, the air around you does have a certain density. It's just that we're so used to it, we don't notice it. And then bringing your hands in and push up. One of the things happening in the body, one of the processes we want to pay particular attention to some of the time is this two-way movement. There's a downward movement, particularly felt hips, lower back, gentle to push down into the floor, feet pushing down. That is a counterbalance to the upward movement, to an extended movement. And this is always the case in Tai Chi. There is always some kind of counterbalancing movement, which in the end amounts to a movement downwards into the ground. This helps you to keep your root, to keep your stability when you're using your arms, when you're sort of extending out with your upper body. We see it in the first instance with this nice open, tall feeling that we get. But it's there all the time. Now change into the wild goose. So there's an inherent check to the movement when we move as though we're doing Tai Chi. Any kind of movement in the end will always, in a sense, be initiated, be associated with some kind of rooting down. Part in the clouds. This one, I suppose, slightly different to the previous two. There is a slight movement forwards, puts a little bit more emphasis initially in your feet and your legs and your feet pushing down, and then as you come back, that that is taken up by your hips. So go back to rooting down. Let's do these three movements in sequence. So the thing to recognize here, in part at least, is the change. That it's not just a physical thing, it's not just a mental thing. There's a change in the intent. But we want to think about what it is that changes. So things like the rooting down, the counterbalancing movements are still there, maybe in a slightly different way, but the principle downward before you go upward or outward, shall we say, is still being applied. So when we do a little sequence like this, it's quite useful because we learn, I suppose, what you could almost describe as a two-part awareness. One is the awareness of the change from one moment to the next, from one movement to the next, and how we manage that, if you like, how we accomplish that in conjunction with what doesn't really change in a big way, which is this principle of downward movement leading to the upward and outward movement. The other things as well, the overall posture of the movement. So we train our awareness to recognize different components working together. Do one more round of this. So this is something that we want to work with, to cultivate, so that it begins to work for us outside of simply doing Tai Chi. So as we walk down the road and we do the washing up, there is that two-part awareness, monitoring and working with the body. And then change, dragon plucks the stars from the sky. It doesn't guarantee that you'll never overextend or feel a bit wobbly or whatever, but it does help to avoid that. And it means that both those principles and what we learn in the movements themselves, the different skills, if you like, of the movements, are more likely to be things that we apply to our daily lives in one way or another. One more on each side. It's not just the body that's being trained. Training your awareness to keep that sense of focus, and in doing so, to maintain a quality of its own. It's the stillness, the spaciousness, and then changing. And so that's another one of the benefits, if you like. If you separate them out, if you want to separate them out, so it's a benefit for the mind rather than just the body. I'm not sure it's appropriate to separate them. Next time, add turning movements. Gain a strong focus of attention between your hips and your waist. One more round. Scooping the sea and looking at the sky. Another thing that we can focus our attention on with this movement, which I think is quite interesting, we go from that upright position, we go away from it. But even as we go away from it, we still have this image of it, almost like there's a pole there. I sometimes describe it as being like a post in the sea that a boat is moored to. You move away from it, but at a certain point, it feels quite natural to come back to it. There's a point in the flow, there's a point in the rhythm where if you're going to go any further, you'd fall out the chair, wouldn't you, to nosedive the floor, which I don't want you to do. But we get to recognize that moment of change, that point of change. And then grasping the tiger's ears. And the same thing here, because there's a big extensions through your back, through your shoulders, through your arms. We don't want to overdo that. You might liken this to, for instance, something like reaching up to put something on a shelf. Can you do that without losing the root, without straining your back or your shoulders or whatever? One more time. And then switch sides. The process of observing, as I've described it, means that eventually what you're observing gets kind of filed away in your body, it becomes usable. It's like, if you've got books on your shelf, you observe where the books are, and eventually you know where to go for a particular book or something like that. And then grasping the tiger's ears. One more time. Now, your feet back. Still stirring the beans because there's an interesting element to this. So you're going around. Now, going back to this movement for a few moments, the turn is very much from the center of your body. And remember, it's the center of your body that's sinking into the chair. So when we do this, we're stable because we're still sinking down. And it's a very smooth movement in the upper part of the body. No twisting in your back, none of this sort of business. And you can see, as soon as I turn here rather than there, so I've turned in my solar plexus, my back's tight, my shoulders are out of line, and I'm nearly falling out the chair. Go back the other way. Now, bringing your hand into the movement. So you know a part of your attention now on what your arm and your hand is doing, the extension and contraction and so on. So we want that awareness of how we're making the turn to be hardwired. So that whenever we turn, turn around to put the kettle on or pick something up off a table or turn in a shop, you turn to the shelf on the opposite side or whatever. This is how we would do it, not the other way. Try on the other side. Because we know from the figures published by the NHS that we're more likely to fall statistically when we turn because it's a tricky operation, especially if we turn quickly. Practice this enough with that kind of awareness and that different mechanism, that different way of turning becomes more accessible to us. and then both together. So it's quite challenging to try and do this with a slightly complicated exercise. But that just makes it a more useful exercise. Even if you can't do the exercise, just the effort that you make to do it with that awareness of what's happening in the center of your body really works to reinforce that movement. So the benefit of stirring the beans isn't necessarily being able to do the exercise as it is, next time you're outside or even in your house and you turn around to answer the phone or something like that, hopefully you're less likely to fall. Not even about falling, you could just sort of twist your back or pull a muscle or something like that. We've all done that, haven't we? Good. And then just rubbing your hands together. And then tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. And shoulders. And your arms. Just other side. Upper part of your chest. Your belly. And your legs. Okay. And then stand carefully. Give yourself a few moments to get a good posture, feet hip width apart. Your weight slightly forward in your feet, your hips dropping back. Nothing significant has changed, or at least in the terms that I'm talking about. The only difference is there's no chair there. Your hips are still sinking down. You've still got this feeling of your feet sinking down. You're still supported by your legs, only a bit more so. You're still pulling the chin in, the head floating up. Still aware of the centre of the body. Still with that sort of quieter quality in your mind. Still not straining in the upper part of your body. At least that's the theory. In practice, it's a bit different. So all those things that I pointed out, all those processes, or however you care to think about them, that we've tried to hardwire into our system in one way or another, are the things that we need for this posture, for the standing posture, and for the stepping, and so on and so forth. They're the same qualities. And then just sinking down. So those qualities are right at the heart of what we do in Tai Chi. The expression of them comes further up and out in the body. So they're expressed differently, slightly differently in the standing to the seated, in some cases, not in every case. But those essential parts of the jigsaw, and I mentioned the idea of putting the jigsaw together. The really important bits are the same. Still the countering movement. Even as your hips are pushed up, there is still a feeling of them being pulled down that eventually you just allow yourself to yield to. And then changing. So just as when we did these three movements in the sequence, when we were seated, we had the same things going on, but slightly differently expressed, largely through the upper body and arms, of course, not entirely, but mostly. So those same principles work for us, with the expression being different, mostly because we're standing, not sitting. And then heart in the clouds. One more time. One foot forwards. Another thing that is the same as the awareness, the movement of your weight. It's moving from foot to foot rather than feet to hips, but it's the same awareness. So those qualities that we work to cultivate in the chair-based exercises are useful to us, important to us in the standing. In fact, I've often argued that because in many ways, I think those principles are a lot more obvious. How they work was more obvious than standing than seated. I think going from seated to standing is, in a way, an easier process than going from standing to seated. Because if you're used to doing these things standing, my experience is that it's actually more challenging to try and find them seated. And certainly my experience is that not everybody can make that transition. Raising your toes and your heel. And remember, if you want to use a chair or a wall for support or something, stepping in can be quite useful just to be touching the wall or something. Takes away the sort of tightening that we can sometimes get when we do this. And again, means that you're more likely to be able to both access some of those basic qualities that we're talking about, some of those core principles, and also, because you're training yourself to observe, recognize that they do actually work. Because it's not always a case of supporting yourself when you do something like this. And shake out. Remember once I was out for a walk in a wood and it was quite muddy, and you get these little pathways and they were quite slippery. And one was a bit tilted over, and I felt a bit uneasy. And I put my hand out and I touched a small twig, and I instantly felt kind of more stable. And after I thought about it, I thought, well, why? What was it? That it was a twig. It wasn't going to. If I had slipped over or kind of tumbled over, touching the tip with my fingertips wasn't going to help me. And I realised that we could be doing this. If you feel a bit wobbly, just having your fingers lightly touching the wall actually give you an outside reference point and just enable you to find other things that are going on. So it can be very useful to do that, because it can help you to really appreciate the value of these core elements of the art. So however you want to do that, just try that on the other side. Remember that softening on the outer sort of edges, the outer parts of the body, including the soles of your feet. Raising your toes and your heel. And stepping in. Now let's do Wind Blows the Willows, because it's another one, of course, that has those turning movements. So if I do this, for instance, I go here and I turn from here, from my rib cage, and I do this. I didn't plan that. It just happened. It's like this, and you can see I'm out of line. If I turn from here, what's that? It's a huge difference, a really significant difference. So I do this with my back to you, so hopefully it'll be easier to follow. Have your left foot forwards, go into your back both and turn, let your arms swing out. Another element, and the one of the ones that is really kind of helping to move your arms without you straining would be the rhythm of the movement, expanding and contracting. We notice that a little bit right at the start with our breathing. And then on the other side. So you turn, you release in your hips, so you sink as you turn. And that's why it's important to feel that rhythm as well, because what you don't want to do is to sink, turn, and then kind of strain in your shoulders. One more time. And go back to your chest. So we come back to those core ideas, and this is sort of, I suppose I was going to say, it's almost ubiquitous in Tai Chi, that having started off, trying to establish those principles and so on and so forth, we then go in all sorts of different directions, complicated movements, tricky movements, challenging movements. But at the end of all of that, we remind ourselves of these core principles, and of the significance of them. And we also maybe sometimes will notice a change in our awareness of that and how they're feeling. And also establish again this key aspect, which I suppose isn't really something that we hardwire into the body, but recognizing the importance of the return, of taking that time, that space, however you care to think about it. So embrace tiger, return to the mountain. And rest. Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody. Do shout out if you have any questions.
We lost our internet connection.